What if the voice in Philip's comms isn't an AI, but the consciousness of someone he lost? And what if my theory about Isaiah being a human experiment just became canon? Today, we're diving into the darkest revelations of World Underneath that change everything we know about the end of this world. If you haven't read them yet, World Underneath is where love and Deepspace hides its biggest lore reveals, stuff the main story only hints at. And in chapters 25 to 30, we're seeing experiments, hidden agendas, the thunders of ever, and even entire civilizations start to connect. I'm Princess Farron, and let's travel through the deep space tunnel and explore all this together. Chapter 25: Light into Dust. This chapter is wholly dedicated to our new favorite rage-baited, Isaiah. And curiously, I also got something right in a theory video I posted in March, and also in a short posted a year ago, but more about it later on. Once again, we get to see him in full "I'm better than everyone else here because I'm part of the royal family" persona. Will he ever change? We get some clues in this chapter. We start off in the training grounds of the Lightseekers. Isaiah witnesses bickering between a group of the so-called commoners and an annoying Marquis. So basically, the two groups are arguing over the right to use the training grounds to prepare for the upcoming Lightseeker selection ceremony. The Marquis believes that because the others don't share a royal bloodline, training won't do them any good, as they won't be selected by the Astra Knight Academy. However, the other students had reserved the space previously and according to the rules. It's clear to see that Isaiah's sense of entitlement comes from the general culture of Philos. And it's not simply a flaw in his character, it's a flaw caused by his education and environment. To end the dispute, Isaiah gives the commoners passes to the outer hall for the banquet his father is hosting so that they can try their luck there. And all the while, Isaiah truly thought he was giving them a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. That's when he sees Xavier and Jeremiah approaching. And immediately, the students surround him, asking for his help. Once again, there's a striking contrast between the way Xavier and Isaiah act and how other people feel about them. Xavier ignores Isaiah and heads straight to the Marquis. He simply shows him that the allotted time slot is still underway. Short and sweet. That was all it took to settle the case. Isaiah takes the chance to invite Xavier to the banquet as per his father's request, relieved that he won't have to ask his whereabouts to the MC, and he completely ignores Jeremiah, of course, because he's a commoner, right? Xavier, however, refuses the invitation, excusing himself with training. He lives with Jeremiah, leaving Isaiah fuming. I swear I can imagine his expression. Days after the situation took place, Isaiah is still obsessed about what happened. He can't comprehend how Xavier can deal with a commoner like Jeremiah like he was his equal, or how a simple commoner can dream of joining the Order of the Lightseekers. Isaiah deeply believes that bloodline in duty should mean everything. He thinks he's the embodiment of reason and that he will be the one to show Xavier the proper path. So what does Isaiah decide to do? He challenges Jeremiah for a duel. Of course he does. You remember how he also challenged the MC for a duel in 2R yesterday, right? He's always waiting for a chance to prove himself because deep down, he doesn't feel good enough and people don't treat him as they do Xavier. And unfortunately, Isaiah hasn't yet figured out why. He thinks it's all about lineage and talent. But that's not it. It's all about the way he thinks and acts. So without waiting for Jeremiah's response, he attacks like a madman, and he wins. Pride fills his whole being until he realizes that Xavier doesn't even acknowledge his victory over Jeremiah, and instead picks up his friend's fallen sword and returns it to Jeremiah. Showing off his prowess meant nothing in Xavier's eyes. We then cut to Soren reading Isaiah's journal, and we learn that even his handwriting is proof of how irascible he is. In his journal, Isaiah recounts how disappointed he was to find out that Xavier had invited a motley crew of commoners to Operation Backtrack, and they had a mechanical sugar glider who sung and chirped, "You can do it!" Now, the last one was unexpected, and do you know what it reminded me of? Mephisto, because he too is a mechanical animal. Although Mephi is a lot more advanced, it's still a curious detail. All the time Isaiah spent with his teammates, he kept considering them unworthy to the point of believing Farspace rejection was caused by not having royal blood. He considered every life on the spaceship disposable. Yet, he refuses to admit that on occasion he passed out from his injuries. Why? Because that would place him at the exact spot of his teammates, despite his royal blood. When the backtrackers got stranded on Earth, Isaiah's anger issues got even worse. Losing hope in their mission, many backtrackers, as we know, leave the group. Xavier keeps acting like he's complete opposite, never showing anger while the people come and go. Eventually, in one of his walks, Isaiah describes how he once again met one of the deserters, Soren, the one who's reading his journal. For Isaiah, never realized that when Soren started agreeing with him, he was in fact manipulating him. Apparently, his royal blood wasn't sharp enough for that, right? And it's this info that Soren uses to lure Isaiah in, making him think he'll become the savior of Philos. Isaiah's pride is his weakness, and Soren easily exploits it. Ever starts experimenting on Isaiah. Being part of the royal bloodline, they use him as a substitute model to study unique physiological mechanisms of Xavier. They keep testing on Isaiah, bringing him to the limit, trying to decode what allows the royal bloodlines to resist the degradation of telomeres, which are repetitive DNA sequences that protect the ends of chromosomes from becoming frayed. As cells divide, telomeres shorten until the cell can no longer divide and becomes inactive or dies. So, their aim is to identify the possible thresholds and potential control points that may be applicable to Xavier. Just as it was stated in World Underneath chapter Sealed in Dust, their goal is to develop a serum capable of controlling Xavier. I've published a video theorizing about how Isaiah was possibly a test subject ever used in order to test a drug meant for Xavier. And I got that right! I did. I also speculated that Xavier might already be consuming that substance, but we don't have proof of it yet. And I hope I'm wrong. As the experiment proceeds, Isaiah is eventually affected. Mental disorientation, memory retrieval dysfunction, and emotional instability. When Isaiah finds out about Soren's plans regarding Philos transplantation, he no longer wants to cooperate with the experiment. He realizes that he was only a substitute for Xavier. Again, he feels like he wasn't good enough. Xavier ends up rescuing Isaiah and taking him into a hospital, and 2 weeks after, he still has moments when he spaces out. And despite everything that happened, he still won't admit that he was fooled by Soren. If Isaiah already had issues, the experience of being fooled only enhanced this distrust towards everyone, including Xavier. The chapter ends with Lincoln's annual carnival. Xavier, the MC, and Jeremiah go outside in costume. Isaiah joins them, and this is when Isaiah slowly, but finally, starts to allow others in, if only just a little. He even accepts a gift from the MC and gives candy to children. This chapter completes a fully satisfying arc for Isaiah. He starts off as an arrogant peacock who feels superior to most people. Then, that same arrogance makes him easy prey to being manipulated by the likes of Soren, someone he initially dismissed. And finally, through the persistent companionship of Xavier, Jeremiah, and the MC, he starts to see what the rest of the world and its people have of good. Chapter 26, Good Night, Frostmere. This chapter allows us to take a peek at how Grayson and Axo Hospital are doing after Zayne left in the end of Death and Rebirth. Frostmere, an Arctic town, faced a glacial canyon collapse and an extremely cold downdraft. And we all know what these disasters point to, right? The extreme cold anomalies that afflict the worlds before their annihilation. Grayson has just returned from Frostmere's rescue mission. Axo Hospital is as busy as ever. There are always more patients and never enough hands. Patients and their families ask for Dr. Zayne, and the excuse for his absence is that Dr. Zayne is on a business trip, and they don't know exactly when he'll return. As he prepares to write reports of the victims and the rescue workers who didn't make it, Grayson remembers Zayne's composed demeanor when dealing with such situations. The weight Zayne used to carry alone now rests on everyone's shoulders. The chapter then takes us back in time so we can get to know Frostmere a little better. It's a town with a small population located at the end of a glacial canyon, with the glacial lake nestled at the lower part of said canyon. As the magnetic field in the area had been displaying anomalies, the Arctic Hunters Association was to evacuate the townspeople, the last group set to leave after the new year. It's here we once again meet Jeroen, the Arctic hunter that Zayne treated in World Underneath Chapter 9, No Mourning. Zayne implanted Cryozina in the hunter's heart. Apparently, Jeroen had just recovered from his injury, his prosthetic leg feeling more powerful than previously. While talking to a tavern owner, the hunter learned that some tourists found the remains of a massive ancient creature in the glacier, and the rumor has it that it's connected to the fluctuations in the Deepspace tunnel. Apparently, in 2034, the year of the Chrono Rift catastrophe, there were also signs of ancient activity in the glacier, as well as at the time of the Mount Eternal incident. We know very well what took place in Mount Eternal, namely that Zayne's friend William turned into a wanderer and Zayne was forced to deliver him from his misery. And at present, Zayne is away from everyone, working in a fractal library trying to find the solution in the book, or worlds, or branching possibilities. It's all related to the Grand Eradication and to Zayne and the role he has yet to assume. We're also introduced to the tavern owner's daughter, a lively little girl who wanted Jeroen to take her to see the snow velvet flowers, the same one Zayne had in his office but ended up not surviving, if you remember. These flowers are meant as a symbol of life and good fortune, another poetic foreshadowing in the writing of this game. Suddenly, they heard a loud rumble. The hunter gets the warning. There was a breach in the glacial lake and the flood waters would arrive in 15 minutes. The last group of townspeople was still there, and a disaster was already on the way. Can you imagine the panic? I swear, Zayne-related stories are always tragic. Jeroen quickly mobilizes the people towards high ground, namely the mining tower and the bell tower. The tavern owner and his daughter are among the fleeing crowd. As the people took refuge in the tower, Jeroen did his best to reassure them, saying the nearest hunter outpost should be there soon. As the flood waters approached, he directed the people to latch themselves to the tower's railings, hands and arms interlocking, while he stayed at the outermost edge of the crowd. The people survived the flood, but most of them did not survive the downdraft that followed, and temperatures as low as minus 42 degrees Celsius. Among them is Jeroen. His force faded as he was dangling on a ladder of a rescue helicopter. As Grayson reads the report, we learn that the Cryozina Zayne had implanted in the hunter's heart continued to function despite the extreme cold. That kept him warmer, but also accelerated his body's heat loss. He didn't drift into hypothermic dreams, but instead faced the freezing cold with clarity and pain. After his work is done, Grayson sends Zayne a text message. Zayne calls him. Insightful as ever, Zayne lets Grayson know of a spot in the hospital in which he can cry and watch a new sunrise for those who lost their lives. And Grayson cries. He eventually muses that he doesn't even know if Zayne will return, but regardless, he will have to keep walking his own path. The only ray of hope in this chapter is that the tavern owner's daughter survived, cocooned by the bodies of deceased adults that protected her from the cold. And after the heart-wrenching cold of Frostmere, we need something to soothe the soul, which brings us to chapter 27. Beautiful artistic allegory about the origin of the Lemurians. Chapter 27, A Fairy Tale. This chapter looks like a simple fairy tale, but it might actually explain the origin of the Lemurians and why they're so deeply tied to art and emotion, as well as the cycle that's destroying every world in love in Deepspace. It's an enchanting, metaphorical journey through life's creation from the immemorial times to the current day. The fairy tale takes place in the Deepspace secret spot, the Dream Weaving Bureau, the place closest to the heart of the planet in the ocean's depths. There are two axolotls, mother and child, who are dream weavers, beings that weave dreams from the universe's thoughts. In the story, the baby weaver tells his mother he doesn't want to weave anymore. His mother is patient with him, knowing her son would resist his innate gift. And I don't know if anyone else feels the same, but this immediately mirrors Rafayel as a child, especially his resistance to his role as the sea god and his desire to be free. In the fairy tale, to suit her child, the mother weaver tells him a story. This chapter is a storyception, a fairy tale within a fairy tale. So the mother goes on to tell that once upon a time, the ocean and the deep space were one. It was a time before the creation of life. And this fits in very well with something we learned in 2 Hour Yesterday update, and I expanded a bit on my lore video about it.
Tens of millions of years ago,
Amund revealed that sky and sea were inverted, so basically the sea was above the sky, almost like a true heaven. That made me wonder if the Lemurians could have been celestial beings. Maybe that's why their whales fly and their sculptures have wings. This aligns with ancient cosmology. There's often a cosmic ocean above a solid sky, symbolizing chaos and creation. And here we have it, an ocean that nestled the chaos from which life was eventually created. Mummy Axolotl specifically mentions that the ocean cradled a slumbering earth, like a womb. The waters of earth were warm, and the sunlight reached the deepest depths, nourishing the first forms of life into being, which were them. Their first ancestor floated in the water until they saw a strand of pure green, soft as silk threads. The thread carried genuine feelings of joy under the sun and longing for the flowing water. When his feathery fins come through the thread, the tangled feelings were guided. She mentions that seagrass was woven into forests. That was the beginning of their craft. They learned to catch wandering emotional ripples in the universe to then spin them into visions and dreams to soothe chaos and bring peace. Here are two associations that I'd like to highlight. The first one is submerged eclipse tears of Ramiro. When Rafayel was talking about the primordial sea god that created Lemuria, he said,
his bones became the whales who bore the sun disk, the moon clams that measure time, the coral bridges that lead to the netherworld.
A powerful being, a creator of worlds and civilizations, deeply connects both instances. The second is a certain association to the realm of the subconscious, which is highly connected to the sign of Pisces. And it's also something I talked about in my Love and Deep Space astrology video about Rafayel. So their role is clear. They shape emotions into dreams. Those undefined things that we usually are not fully conscious of, but that still show in how we interact with the world. The sign of Pisces is symbolic of navigating what's beneath the surface and sometimes getting lost in it. Rafayel, being both the Pisces and the sea god, has these traits, and the story recounted in this supposed fairy tale adds another layer to those defining traits. The Mummy Dreamweaver doesn't know how the first thread came to be. The threads have always been there, always waiting. She says maybe it was a sigh whispered by the deep space in the midst of a dream. The deep space here is almost referred to as an entity, and if we add this subtle hint to what we learned in 2 Hour Yesterday, could that entity be the MC, or better said, one of her iterations? Astra? or another being we have yet to know or hear about? Let me know what you think. Before the mother continues the story, they settle upon a giant clam with blue frilled edges. It reminds us of something familiar, right? According to the story, after the first thread was woven into a forest, the world awakened all of a sudden, and the ocean was teeming with life. Countless forms and colors bloomed. Remember how the Lemurians are able to see and distinguish among countless colors? I believe that's a callback to that. New creatures brought a lot more feelings, which originated the threads to bloom into many more hues. But then a long night descended. The mother Dreamweaver describes it as a whale that swept across the planet. All life struggled in vain, and an endless void made the threads sprout in agonizing thorns. Thorns! And we have seen this imagery before, specifically tied to Zayne. In Zayne's Foreseer Mist, the Tower of Secrets, the icy thorns that priest Zayne as a punishment for his disobedience. And after that, a grand eradication took place, silencing life on land and ocean. What can we infer from this? Before this grand eradication that took place, thorns attacked the threads of dreams. And there are some things I want to talk about. First, this could mean that Zayne is indeed the one responsible for those thorns, as he is the god of annihilation. Second, this could be proof that Astra, the one who pierced Zayne, is indeed the entity responsible for deciding when a grand eradication takes place. And it could also tie in with the nightmare Zayne and Dawnbreaker Zayne have, because if thorns sprout in the threads of dreams, then that could perhaps cause them to glitch, so to speak, allowing each version of Zayne to catch glimpses of the other one. And speaking of glitch, this could be subtly hinting at another possibility. One that I've talked about before, that this could be a simulation. I first had this idea when the World Underneath chapter Lincoln Online was released, which was reinforced into our yesterday when the MC wondered if Lincoln Online was glitching again. I actually did a video about it more than a year ago, and I also mentioned another game, Dreamfall Chapters, because in that story they were trying to trap people in a dream world simulation, which is actually sort of appropriate if we consider this fairy tale we're reading about. Anyway, these are just some theories for you to think about, and tell me if you think any of this seems plausible. Back to the fairy tale, the mother Dreamweaver goes on to explain that the Dreamweavers that remained carried on weaving, trying to turn the threads of agony into something bearable, so they wove terrible nightmares, hoping those could hold that despair. But coming through so many charred, tangled threads had a cost to the Dreamweavers. Like the true axolotl, they are blessed with the gift of regeneration, but even that didn't prevent their bodies from being torn apart and devoured. The scars on the mother Dreamweaver are proof of such torment. The baby Dreamweaver becomes sad after learning all this, but hope remains. His mother shows him a peacock green strand that was kissed by sunlight, even more beautiful than life's beginning. And this feels very deliberate. This thread might be connected to the MC. Then the Dreamweavers survived. They returned to the seabed, the place closest to the planet's heart, and fell into a deep slumber for 30 million years, waiting to once again be awakened by life. And that's when the baby Dreamweaver finally picked the peacock green strand and twined it. Sea and land are woven into form. Then it was time for humanity to arrive. Their dreams are more complicated. They hold regrets and hopes about the past, present, and future. And when they dream of each other, there's a brilliant splendor. They can face danger and oblivion for the sake of another soul, giving rise to ivory-colored dreams, or even a light as crystalline as diamond when they gaze upon the stars and dream of touching them. They originated the richest tapestries they had ever woven. However, a light that's too bright casts the darkest of shadows. Curiosity turned into greed, love into possession. She then talks about the fall of Lemuria and how they had to bury their friends. In the dreams of those people killed in the so-called name of love, they found a black hole, a void. And that's why there no longer are threads, but thorns. And once again, it stated that humanity is in its last moments. And honestly, this feels like it's breaking the fourth wall, because this is what's happening on our Earth right now. Humans turning on each other in the name of supposed peace and justice, killing and destroying other human beings, animals, and the environment. It makes you wonder if we're heading toward an eradication of our own making. Let's get back to the fairy tale. The Dreamweavers are artists who chronicle civilization through their creations. The Mother Dreamweaver states that humans sought from them the secret of eternal life, but they don't actually know the answer. Together, Mother and Son complete the final corner of your dream out of the tapestry woven with thorns. And even with the gift of regeneration, the baby weaver still gets wounds and pain. The chapter ends when the old butler closes the book. He leaves a lesson for the children. If you had never seen ugliness, how would you know what beauty is? The Dreamweavers don't choose what to create, they simply reflect existence. And the children, as future chroniclers, will continue that role, which means the state of the world is already written in its threads. This makes sense because we know that most Lemurians are very talented at singing, painting, and other forms of art, so their art is also a way of living proof of their way of living in the current surrounding world. Outside, listening to the story is most likely Rafayel, gazing at the deep sea and the deep space slowly merging into one. More than being poetic, this implies a possible return to how their civilization used to be, with the sky and the sea inverted. This also makes me think of a line Rafayel says in his story branch, Land of Secret Flames. Though he was talking about him always reuniting with the MC, it can also mean the return of the sea and the ocean as one. But in the end, rainwater and seawater will find their way back to each other. They will return to how they were before they parted ways. And this could potentially be telling us that Raphael's full power is about to be restored. This was a very rich chapter. It's like an allegory of what the role of the Lemurian is, the way they see colors no one else does, of having a civilization that used to thrive underwater like any other. And if you remember World Underneath Chapter 8 Micro-Universe, their very DNA seems like a work of art in itself. And the baby one mirroring the current timeline Raphael and his reluctance to follow a set path. So this story is a warning. Humanity might already be at the stage where those threads are turning into thorns. Before we move to the next chapter, I leave you with one question. Could these axolotls, Dreamweavers, be the little ones that Kalaya mentioned in our yesterday? Chapter 28, Onychinus Aesthetics. Chapter 27 talks about preserving existence through memory, dreams, and threads. But Chapter 28 asks a much more direct question. What if you could preserve a person another way? Not through stories, but through technology. Because Philip's chapter might be our clearest hint yet that consciousness in love and deep space doesn't just disappear. Do you remember him? Philip is the owner of the Odd Workshop, as well as a skilled inventor who frequently works with Sylus, and that used to be a colleague to Josephine and Dimitri in the Gaia Research Center. Since we are in the N109 zone, we start off with a surprise attack from Ever. But the twins, Luke and Kieran, also added to the mess while fighting them off. They even lost the titanium alloy wing-type exoskeleton Sylus had commissioned for Mephisto. As usual, the twins continue their shenanigans. And with the ambush forgotten, they keep pestering Philip for new gear. After all, if Mephi gets some, so should they, right? In the meantime, Philip receives a message from Anemone saying Sylus had been hit with an antimatter weapon, and that's why Ever took the opportunity to ambush Onychinus. Fortunately, Philip put a tracker on the gear so that they can follow it and get it back. They give chase on an ancient, better-looking grey van. Luke and Kieran complain that the van doesn't meet the killer aesthetics. They'd prefer an armored motorcycle with blue flames roaring from the exhaust. Apparently, that was the only available vehicle with offensive and defensive modifications. Innocent on the outside, Onychinus' level of dangerous on the inside. Makes sense to me. As they approach the location, the twins text Hank, a former pro racer, to join them on the mission. Luke reminisces about the time Sylus took an interest in Philip, despite him being an ever defector. He recalls how Philip never reacted when Luke tried to threaten or charm him. But that changed when he first saw Luke's twin, Kieran, who said, "Why waste breath on logic when kidnapping is so much faster?" He looked like he was about to lash out, but eventually accepted Sylus' invitation. While texting Hank, Luke learns that Hank is driving a fire-breathing motorcycle, and then he goes and says, "Perfect! 303," which is Philip's code name, drives like a grandpa on a morning stroll. And guess what? Philip heard it all because he has a back-end monitor and a speaker mode. The twins hear a voice similar to Philip's repeating what Luke has just sent to Hank. No one has time to think about it because two SUVs suddenly box in the van. Hank makes an entrance with his flashy motorbike, causing the two SUVs to crash. After showing off his Onychinus killer aesthetics, Hank takes the wheel of the grey van. But soon, ever operatives that were alerted by the SUV's crash approach the van. The van's AI voice soon warns them. Philip explains that it's an intelligent model that he trained and whose combined IQ is 1.5 times his own. Its voice is 99% identical to Philip's. Curious, right? Anyway, more ever vehicles approach, exceeding the safety threshold. That's when Hank shares some of Sylus' teachings. When you're boxed in a track, the best counterattack isn't shaking off your opponents. It's forcing them onto the track where you have the advantage. After a mad chase scene takes place, that includes ever and diameter weapons that cause the van to nearly flip, throwing Philip across the ground, his communication device slipping from his grip. The crucial point of this chapter starts here. Philip drifts into a semi-consciousness and recalls a vision of the past. Felix, Philip's twin, keeps calling his brother to let him know he's in the hospital and that medication should maintain his condition stable. The last message is from Felix saying he volunteered for a new trial at Xander Sciences. Do you remember World Underneath Chapter 10, Mischief? In it, we learned that Ever was running experiments on twins. Luke and Kieran were part of those being subjected to it. And Philip's twin volunteered to carry on being tested by Ever. That's why Luke and Kieran called him 303, because in that experiment, everyone with an identical twin had a number. Philip was in the middle of a routine briefing when he got the information that the resuscitation efforts for Felix had failed. He had placed his hopes on Xander Sciences and their so-called breakthrough treatment. Back then, he questioned if he had made the right choice leaving Ever, because if he had stayed, at least he could have been with Felix till the end. And that's a very real doubt to have, a very real pain to carry, because ultimately, Philip couldn't help but feel like he failed his twin brother, that he wasn't there for him when he needed him the most. The main story had already hinted at Philip's complex past, but knowing the details definitely makes everything more tragic. So when Philip asked this question to Sylus, his answer was, "You're still alive." That means his life hasn't truly reached its end. The twins haul Philip and the device back to the van. The comms device suddenly flickers to life, and Phil's voice returns, saying he's sorry they never got to meet again, but that he never blamed Philip. And that's when Philip opens his eyes. After that, Philip quickly shows the other three that he's made some tweaks to the van. It turns out the vehicle has a composite alloy armor and even a weapon platform that rises from the roof with several rows of micro-missiles. I bet Philip and Jeremiah could have some very interesting conversations about kitting a vehicle, right? But let's backtrack a bit. We have to talk about the AI voice. Remember how the text mentions that he sounds human and he has inflection? Also, do you remember how Ever was experimenting on how to transfer consciousness into a machine so that the soul would keep on living? And Philip used to be part of Ever, right? So, All this to say that the voice that came out of the comms device is probably what's left of Felix. We could say that it was Philip's imagination, but that line about never blaming him, it hits too close to home. And what Sylus said fits into this too. And by the way, if Felix's soul has the comms device as a vessel, then that could mean that Mephisto is similar to him. Maybe Mephi could harbor the White Crow soul from Sylus' myth, Crimson Spirit. Does that make sense to you too? Let me know your thoughts about this. This chapter ends when Mephisto arrives to collect his new gear. Philip gives it already calibrated to the bird, as well as the roots to the biometric key that Sylus was after in the Death and Rebirth update. Before returning to the workshop to fix the comms device, Philip decides to go for a tea in the Elysium bar, subtly hinting that he's most likely starting to forgive himself for not being physically by his twin's side in the final moments. Chapter 29, Above the Ashes. This one shows us how after almost dying in the Bloomshore explosion, Caleb rose above the ashes of that lost way of living into the higher ranks of the Farspace fleet. To do that, it focuses on Rufus, captain of the Farspace fleet. In the beginning, we see how the personnel seem to be intimidated by Captain Rufus' presence. We see him in the interrogation room with his logistics division quartermaster of 5 years and a supplies partner representative. They were smuggling unquarantined high-risk protocors into Skyhaven. His quartermaster is to be stripped of all his duties immediately, and the deal with the partner terminated. 2 weeks later, the restructuring of the partnerships went smoothly. It turns out that Evers seized the opportunity to strike a deal. Evers' equipment is in every corner of the fleet. Captain Rufus encounters one of Evers' advisors, who informs him that the fleet is now equipped with Evers' latest receiver for Deepspace signals, the best for ensuring the best decision-making efficiency. The captain stands his ground, saying the previous receivers are honest. He states the new equipment trims away signal noises that could very well be a new transmission or the intermittent distress call from a powerless escape pod as it drifts in the dark. And if you remember what happened in Caleb's anecdote, Pathless Realm, it makes even more sense. The advisor ends up conceding because it's no use spoiling the partnership this early on. Rufus doesn't waste any more time and retrieves a file about Caleb. Soon after, the two have another discussion about the receiver's efficiency. The advisor insists that deploying a suppressor developed by Ever will neutralize energy fluctuations, allowing them to save the Deep Space Aviation Administration Patrol Squadron, as well as salvaging a mutated protocore. Captain Rufus is faced with a difficult decision because if he ignores the distress signals that wouldn't have been caught by Ever's receivers, then he can refuse Ever's suppressor solution. But if he decides to save them, then Ever gets their way. The captain makes his call. The flagship departs to save the DAA patrol. He would rather be marked for removal than become a blade on their hands. As the flagship advances through the magnetic storm, we learn something unexpected. The ships have a neural link connection. They're connecting to their captain's minds and nervous systems. This really takes the whole concept of becoming one with the ship to a whole other level. They retrieve the protocore, but an alarm lights up. To stabilize the protocore, they need an external power source. However, there are only 2 power sources: the flagship's engine and the life support systems of the stranded DAA patrol squadron. That was Ever's true trap. And what does Captain Rufus do? He remains faithful to his honor. He orders his people to evacuate the ship. Without the suppressor's guidance, the protocore begins to collapse and expand. As Rufus' nervous system is fused with the flagship system, every piece of armor that is torn away feels like it's being ripped from his own body. Still, he endures the consequence of his decision. The DAA's patrol squadron doesn't make it. As for the flagship, its armor is stripped clean, and the oxygen levels are below the safety threshold. As Rufus' consciousness drifts away, a fighter jet appears at a staggering speed. It fires a silver beacon that sees the energy torrent that should have devoured the flagship, its shockwaves hurling the ship toward the far reaches of deep space. When Rufus regains consciousness, he is in a medical station. As he tries to gather his thoughts, he realizes he's no longer fit for any intensive command. Liam steps inside in the meantime and reads him the official debriefing that was submitted to Ever. Basically, Rufus was stripped of his rank of captain and declared perished alongside his ship. The new colonel, Caleb, retrieved the mutated protocore and prevented a power grid crisis in Skyhaven. So yes, this chapter just shows us how much of a mastermind Caleb can be. He manipulated his way through Ever so that he could get the rank of colonel in the Farspace fleet. And by hiding Rufus' survival, he turned on Ever. Perhaps Ever should start being afraid of Caleb, but of course they have no idea. Caleb did a good job, indeed. And to boot, this detail is also interesting. The medical facility in which Rufus is recovering is Caleb's private facility. He even has secret medical facilities. Wow! Caleb himself arrives in the meantime, and that's when Rufus sees his successor for the first time, in person. As Caleb's wavering figure leaves, Rufus muses that maybe the Farspace fleet didn't need someone willing to burn themselves to ashes, but instead a greater night. And hidden at night's end will be the morning finally unsheathed, which implies that Caleb is acting in deceitful ways as an even darker night so that the light of the sun can shine bright when morning comes. And especially after yin-yang sundering and Caleb's association with the young energy and the sun, you can check out my breakdown of the myth if you want, this makes even more sense. Caleb has mastered the game, probably like no one else. He will act dirty and do whatever it takes to assure that he is in the right position to reveal what hides in Ever's darkness, and that way, perhaps, bring a little more light to the world. Chapter 30, Fairnight's Edge. For the last chapter of the batch, we are going to start by looking at its title, Fairnight's Edge. What does this convey? Well, it gives us the idea that we're right on the verge of a fair night, of a period of darkness with some light amidst it, or a transition through a dark night that will bring some light, pretty much like the edge of a new dawn. And the content of the chapter confirms it. In a file available only to important members in the Deepspace Academy, we learn that since its foundation in 1960, the Academy has always maintained observational records of Earth's civilizations, each mass extinction being Earth's way of renewing itself. Old species disappear so that new ones can emerge. It poses a question. Can humanity be part of such renewal? A species about to be eliminated so that a new, more evolved one can emerge. We then go through the known civilization types. The first one is an extraterrestrial civilization. And if you pay attention, we have the reference SC214. Do you remember when Xavier said, "This is my 214th spring on Earth and it will be the last"? Maybe we can read this sentence in a new light. Most thought that it meant that Xavier would die or return to Philos and abandon DMC. But maybe it meant that after 214 years, the Earth they know will no longer exist, and that's when they would eventually get Earth's protocore. This is just an idea that I don't think I had talked about before and wanted to put out there, so tell me if it makes sense to you. And of course, this file is about the Philosian backtrackers, who seem to defy aging and the laws of physics. The file's assessment is that they are humans from the future who have evolved, which is absolutely correct, as we know. Then there's the file on the oceanic civilization, the merfolk. Besides the obvious description of their aquatic tail, the file mentions that their sensory system relies on clusters of synapses distributed across their skin, but imperceptible to the naked eye. And this ties in with the description we got of the Dreamweavers in Chapter 27, Fairy Tale. The Lemurians' sensory capabilities are far superior to those of humans. They're exceptional artists who possess extreme emotional depth and expression. They're like the ultimate artists, and that makes so much sense because we now know about Dreamweaver's mission of being chroniclers of life through art. Then, of course, we read a file about the higher plane of existence with a code FB001. Could it actually mean the Foreseer base? This focus on eyewitness reports on mirages, white, geometric, transparent structures that have appeared all over the world, including in Lake Knot City and the Arctic. In the Arctic specifically, people say the temperature is significantly lower around the mysterious structures, and they also seen a figure moving between those. We know, it's just Zayne being a busybody on the Fractal Library, desperately trying to find a way to prevent what's about to happen. The last annotation on the files reflects on whether these civilizations are appearing to save or replace humanity. There's no need to answer that because that's something we know the answer to without a doubt. The motivations of the 3 OG LIs are well known. And as a side note, these files seem to describe the allies as members of starseed civilizations. I don't know if you've heard about them. They are believed to be advanced extraterrestrial societies like the Pleiadians, Syrians, Andromedans, and others, and are supposed to help humanity's spiritual awakening, elevating them into higher consciousness planes. Maybe we can explore that theme in another video if anyone is interested, but I just leave this idea here. A different department has a file about Ever's experiments of life digitization by extracting consciousness. We had already seen examples of this on the Abyssal Chaos missions. This specific experiment extracted the consciousness of fruit flies, and it was codenamed Open Swarm. However, it had to be terminated because the subjects triggered mechanical interference. The file then reports several sightings of massive unidentified creatures, as well as a high-temperature signature behind the window of a top-floor office. Any traces of the presence were wiped clean. Makes you think, right? So, first of all, the fruit flies experiment and the mention of the massive creature reminded me of the winged creature flying out of a cocoon, which is mentioned towards the end of Death and Rebirth, but this is just a detail. What's more important is how this section relates to what we learned in Chapter 28, Onychinus' statics. Here we have an experiment of consciousness transfer, a mention of mechanical interference, and a presence outside a window whose traces were eliminated. In Chapter 28, it is implied that the AI Philip developed may very well be what's left of his twin brother's consciousness. Mephisto is probably the result of something very similar. Maybe the one behind the window was actually Mephi. It could also be an Alterum, yes. But since this is related to Sylus, I am going to go with what I initially said. But once again, let me know, what do you think? Is this about Alterums, Mephi, or some sort of an unknown creature? From the Academy's Biology Division, we have a file about the Gaia Research Center. It explained that Ever's Gaia Research Center is the earliest cross-civilization research institution, and despite the DA's friendly collaboration with the Institute, they never divulged the core of their operations. Here we have some interesting info, that Eva's rise to prominence and Gaia's establishment coincided with the mysterious family investment in Ever. So they believe that Gaia didn't originate from Ever, but was instead an arrangement demanded by the new Ever's investors. And apparently, the source of that investment is tied to a new company called Eon Core Tech, related to protocore energy. They have no clue who the chief director is, they only know that person has a close collaboration with Ever. Well, what do you think? Once again, we'll have to remember what we learned in these World Underneath chapters. Who can be that mystery person who moves in the dark, who strikes advantageous deals with important players without ever showing their hand, and that has a connection to Ever to boot? Yep, all signs point to Caleb. However, there's one detail that still doesn't make much sense. The mention of a family investment. Caleb's only family was Josephine and the MC, and they're not blood related in the main story. So who could those people that invested in Ever be? So far, I don't have an answer to that. It does remind me of Xavier's Catch-22 Memoria, because it talked about influential families supporting Ever. But who could they be apart from perhaps Xavier's own family? So if you have any ideas about it or any clue that I might have forgotten, do let me know. Finally, we have a file from the physics department. It's the decryption of the message sent through the Deepspace tunnel in 2034 when it first appeared near Earth. The complete message that ever mentioned into our yesterday is finally here. We already knew that it was about Earth approaching its end. Now we know it's more of a civilizational, humanities issue. In previous World Underneath patches, let's call them that, we learned about the existence of 3 cosmic jobs: astral enforcers, couriers of the interstellar post office, and now Dreamweavers. This particular message mentions when we awaken, we hope to share the boundless deep space with them, with humanity. This sounds exactly like what the mother Dreamweaver talked about with her baby. In the supposed fairy tale, she explained that when there's a grand eradication, they slumber to once again awaken when it's time for new life to emerge. So, this was probably a message sent by Dreamweaver somewhere in the universe. Humanity's probably become too complex, too focused on selfish pursuits, their threads too entangled to the point that it is difficult to find those shiny strands amidst the thorny ones. They risk returning to the singularity, the point where space-time breaks down and physical laws cease to apply, the ultimate starting point before the beginning of everything. Another book to be added to the fractal library, another failed attempt. These chapters were something else. I really liked knowing more about Isaiah and getting an even better grasp of his psychological motivations. It was also curious to see some of my theories about Isaiah being a test subject in Xavier's stead coming to life. The one about Grayson was heavy, but we can't expect anything else when it comes to Zayne's side of the story. He's working non-stop at the Fractal Library and he's probably not getting closer to any solution. Maybe that was the cause of the downdraft that ensued after the icy floodwaters. Poetic and allegoric, that's the only way I can describe the A Fairy Tale chapter. It gave us insights into the Lemurians and into the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, as well as into the very same process that the sea god goes through as well. The one about Philip was a great way to discover more about him, logically, but possibly also about Mephi's own essence. And the Caleb one? What a great way to show how intelligent and cunning he is. All the players made their moves. Will that be enough to fight the very cycle of the universe? I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Also, if any of you still haven't read the World Underneath chapters, I strongly advise you to. They're a great way to slowly absorb what's going on in Love and Deep Space. Besides, you get to know more insights about the allies and some of our favorite side characters. Drop your theories about these chapters, and do you have any favorites among these 6? Let me know in the comments. I cover Love and Deep Space lore, develop some theories, and dive into the characters' archetypes and mythological inspiration. So, if you enjoy that, consider subscribing. I'll leave these videos and playlists here if you want to know more about Love and Deep Space. This is Princess Farron signing out. Take care and good gaming. Bye!